Good morning. My name is Gil Clelland. I'm the teaching pastor here at Sanctuary London in London, Ontario, and we're going to be speaking this morning from the book of Exodus. To get there, I want to share with you a story. One of my favorite things about traveling around Canada is to taste all the different cultural foods from around Canada. When I was in Montreal a couple of years ago for the World Junior Hockey Championships, we got to taste poutine right there in Montreal. We got to taste the smoked meat sandwich right there in Montreal. Last year when Bonnie and I traveled out to British Columbia, deep in the area where apples are growing all over the place, we got to try many different types of cider, which were just delightful. And when we lived in Thunder Bay, Ontario for 3 years, where I was a pastor in a small country church, we got to try something known as the Persian. The Persian is a unique donut that is created by people who live there, work there, and this Persian is known all across Thunder Bay as the food of Thunder Bay. So when we had people visiting us from other parts of the country, we would take them and get them a Persian. But one of the gentlemen who would visit us, my pastor and friend Bob Beasley, was from Thunder Bay growing up. And so when he would visit there, he would get a box of Persians and take them home so that he'd be able to enjoy a little bit of his upbringing being in Thunder Bay once again. And his expression when he would do this is this: you can take the boy out of Thunder Bay, but you can't take the Thunder Bay out of the boy. He loved his Persians, and he still does. And there's kind of a fun expression there that we can take somebody out of a place, but you can't really take the place out of the person. What we're going to find this week is that God is going to be dealing with Moses in both of those ways. Not only is he going to take Moses out of Egypt and get him to be the leader of his people to take them out of Egypt as well, but he has to get the Egypt out of Moses. So I'm going to open up my Bible. We're going to chat this morning about passages from Exodus and Matthew and talk about just that. So if you have your Bible, you can follow along with me. I'm going to be reading first from Exodus 2, starting at verse 11. And I have the NIV right now. One day, after Moses had grown up, he went out to where his own people were and watched them at their hard labor. He saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his own people. Glancing this way and that and seeing no one, he killed the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. The next day he went out and saw two Hebrews fighting. He asked the one in the wrong, "Why are you hitting your fellow Hebrew?" The man said, "Who made you ruler and judge over us? Are you thinking of killing me as you killed the Egyptian?" Then Moses was afraid and thought, "What I did must have become known." When Pharaoh heard of this, he tried to kill Moses, but Moses fled from Pharaoh and went to live in Midian, where he sat down by a well. And the other passage I want to read to you is from Matthew's Gospel. Matthew's Gospel, starting Matthew 16, starting in verse 21. Matthew 16, starting in verse 21. From that time on, Jesus began to explain to his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things at the hands of the elders, chief priests, and teachers of the Torah, that he must be killed and on the third day be raised to life. Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. "Never, Lord," he said, "this shall never happen to you." Jesus turned and said to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me. You do not have in mind the things of God, but the things of humanity." Then Jesus said to his disciples, "If anyone would come after me, he must deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. For whoever wants to save his life will lose it, and whoever loses his life for me will find it. What good will it be for a person if they gain the whole world, yet forfeit their soul?" May God be blessed in the reading of his holy scriptures this morning. So I'm going to keep a finger there in Matthew, and I'm going to be reading from Exodus to begin with to catch us up on where we were from last week. Last week, as you may remember, we were talking about Moses being rescued from sure death. Pharaoh had established a decree that any boy born into the Hebrew world at that point was to be killed at birth by one of the midwives. The midwives then stopped doing that. They didn't listen to Pharaoh because, as we talked about last week, they feared God instead of fearing Pharaoh. And so all the boys lived. So then Pharaoh issued a decree to all of Egypt, all of the Hebrew people, saying if any Hebrew boy is born, it's everybody's responsibility to throw that boy into the Nile and kill him. So that was the decree. When Moses was born, they hid him for a bit, and then Moses' mom bravely and creatively put Moses in the water near a time when Pharaoh's daughter was there. And thankfully for Moses' mom, the cries of Moses broke the heart of Pharaoh's daughter. And Pharaoh's daughter takes the child out of the water, rescues the child out of the water. And then Moses' mom is actually his wet nurse during his young years. And then Moses grows up in the imperial court as part of the family of Pharaoh. So Moses grows up in the mindset and the methods of empire. So that's what he knows as his base response to things. And I want to go over this a little bit, slow it down a little bit, and help us to understand the ways of empire, to help us understand a little bit about how empire still influences things today. Because I think it's easy to think as empire as a historical thing, perhaps even as a Star Wars thing, but not that empire impacts us today. But I would say that perhaps even more so, empire is impacting us because it's kind of a hidden agenda within the framework of certain countries, within certain companies, and it's just a mindset of the way you do business today. So let's go over what an empire is, and then we'll chat about how it has impacted Moses and what the response of God was to that. The basic idea of an empire is to maintain power over another at any cost. At any cost, for most of history, meant violence. Violence with the threat of death. That they would kill you if you ever were to rise up, if you were ever to do anything. Obviously, the Roman Empire knew how to do this more effectively than some because they had these propaganda crosses outside of every major city. They were a threat to any rising up against the empire. That this was the threat of your demise if you ever wanted to challenge empire. So that there was the violence, there was a threat of violence, and there was the propaganda, which is a reminder of power. A reminder of power. It was a reminder of your place within society. So when you saw the propaganda of the empire, you knew where everybody fit. So Pharaoh was up here, and then the slaves were down here, and everybody else kind of fit in between, and everybody knew their place, and everybody knew how to act, so that the people at the bottom of this were to remain quiet. They weren't to challenge the empire because there was a threat often that they would lose out on all of the benefits of empire, the peace that empire brought, the way that it was that you received a bunch of stuff from the empire. And so there was benefits for everybody, and so everybody kind of just stayed quiet. Even though the methods of empire were to crush, to be violent, to uphold things with power over everybody. And there was a common enemy within empire. All the lawless ones, the violent ones, those are on the outskirts, and those are the enemies. They're the bad guys. And we've got to maintain a peaceful kind of way of doing things. And peace obviously was at the cost of violence. You upheld violence and that maintained peace. Everybody was scared of doing anything. And the final thing that I want to highlight about what empires are is they see everything and everyone as a resource to maintain power. Everything and everyone is a resource to maintain power. So they don't see people as people, they see them as resources, hence slavery. Hence, that's the way they see the planet. That the planet isn't something to partner with, as it is in the creation narrative, but it is something to crush, to use as a resource in order that they may build up their own power. This is how empires have worked then and now. And those are the basic philosophies of all empires. And Moses was brought up in the middle of it. This is what he understood life to be. That the Egyptians were always right. They were the ones who had all of the answers. They were the ones bringing peace to the world. If you read the old Roman coins, you'll see that it talks about in Latin the Pax Romana. Pax Romana. That Romans would be bringing the peace to this world. And all empires believe this. That the way that they in crushing everybody, they will keep everybody quiet, and that's what we call peace. God, I trust you know, has a much different sense of what peace is. Peace, shalom, for God means that everything is set right. Everything is the way it should be. That there's enough for everybody. That's the point of Jubilee, as we've talked about quite a few times from the Old Testament. The idea that Jubilee, that announcement that Jesus makes in Luke 4, the year of the Lord's favor, that everybody will have enough. Everybody will be satisfied. And that there's not a violent crushing of one, but a partnership among all people, a partnership with our God, and a partnership with the land. That's the shalom of God. That's everybody having enough. That's the world being treated like a partnership, not an ashtray. But not according to empire. Empire means we uphold power over and we will crush no matter what. So Moses grows up in this. This is his worldview. This is the way he understands things. But one day when he's out wandering, he gets impacted by injustice. This is my hope for pretty much the world, is the Moses story, the Pharaoh's daughter story that we heard last week, that even if a person is stuck right in the middle of empire, there is hope for them, that they will see the injustices of the world, that they will be impacted when they see people are hurting and things aren't the way they should be. So Moses goes out and he sees a slave master crushing a couple of his people, which are slaves at the time. And he sees this and it doesn't sit well with him. He sees the oppression of these two friends of his, these two Hebrew people of his, that he knows those are my people. I see them and my heart breaks because they are being crushed by this guy, the slave master. So what does Moses do? His heart breaks. So what does Moses do? Moses uses the methods of empire to deal with the injustice. He kills the Egyptian. He crushes the Egyptian. He hides the Egyptian's body deep underground under the sand and says, okay, I've dealt with it. That's the way of doing things. And he feels good about himself. I don't know if you can get that from the story, but he feels good about himself because he has stepped in to do something about injustice. And so that's exciting for him. But the next day, he goes back out to speak with his buddies, and he notices a couple of Hebrew men fighting. This one is two people who are in the enslaved world who are fighting among one another. And he takes the one who is the aggressor aside, and he says, listen, pal, what's going on here? And the dude who was the aggressor turns to Moses and says, hey, who made you ruler and judge over us enslaved people? Are you going to kill us the way you did to the Egyptian? It is the slaves, the people on the outskirts of society, the people impacted most by empire, who remind Moses that his methods of dealing with injustice are the methods of the empire. And that he didn't just need to leave Egypt, he needed to get that Egypt deep out of him. How does this play out in our world? What does this look like? Well, as you probably know, the church that I am part of in London, Ontario, works with homeless and street-involved folks, people who have been housing deprived, people who have had injustice handed to them most of their lives. And when we see that, many of us rise up. We want to do something. We want to respond to the poverty. We want to respond to the injustice. It hurts us that people are being hurt. We want to do something. But often our something that we do, and this is what I have found in my own life, is the something that we do just uses the methods of the system we came from, which I would say is a fairly imperial system. That the methods we want to do to alleviate poverty, to help those who are broken, is to come in like Moses, like a superpower, and say, I've got this. I'm going to help you. I've got stuff. I've got things. I'm going to give you those things. Well, we started doing that about 14 years ago when I moved to London, and we started handing stuff out to people. And what we realized is this system of me being up here in a position of power and our friends down here in a position of weakness, constantly receiving and me constantly giving, is a power differential. And all that power differential is a perpetuation of the system from which I came. And we're starting to learn, because we're listening to the people most impacted. That's the point that Moses needed to get to, that he was listening to the people most impacted by his methods. That this method is not the best method. That yes, it's a great first step, that we were responding to injustice and saying it's not good enough to sit in the empire and just receive all the benefits from the empire, but to notice that there's injustices created by the empire. That's great. That's a great first step, to notice injustice. But it's a first step on a long journey for us to realize that the point now is to try to find ways to do this. To be on equal footing together, that there's enough for everybody. And the way we get to that, as Moses is about to find out, is to challenge the entire imperial system. Is to say that we don't want to benefit from that system. We don't want to just live in the peace of violent responses. That we'd rather have a justice which meant peace because everybody has enough. Everybody is partnering with the planet. Everybody is doing their part. And where that starts, according to the Jesus kingdom method, is to raise up those that are most broken. Blessed are the poor. Blessed are the meek. Blessed are those who are broken. Blessed are those who are hungry and thirsting for righteousness. They want things to be set right. And so those are the blessed ones. And we go among the blessed ones and hang out among the blessed ones to hear from them prophetically, as Moses heard from his Hebrew buddies, prophetically, where we are getting it wrong. Now, this is a very humbling experience, let me tell you. I have many times over the last 14 years been told I've been doing it wrong. Now, the good of all of this is that the people that I've run into who tell me that I'm doing it wrong often do it quite gently, often take me aside and say, that wasn't the best response. And I don't understand it right away because I think I'm doing it from good intentions. And I am. The good intentions are really important, but it's not enough. Good methodology also has to be part of it. That we cannot just perpetuate the system from which we came. That we actually need to start challenging the system that we came from. That there actually should be housing for everybody. That each person should be treated well from the get-go in their life. That there should be enough for everybody. These are not philosophies according to some like socialist propaganda, as some of perpetuating on Facebook and other social media places. These are Jesus and Yahweh ideas. This is what is meant by Jubilee, that there's enough for everybody. And so we need to hear that challenge and rise up to that challenge and say, how are we going to respond to that challenge? In any of the injustices that we learn to face. That often when we hear the cry, that we hear something going wrong, we jump in and we use the methods that actually uphold the systems that we eventually need to challenge. And so we need to listen to how those methods are not quite the methods we need to. And all those wonderful lessons come from this amazing story of Moses learning that he needs to not only get out of Egypt, but Egypt needs to get out of Moses. So I think I've hit that one a few times. So let's go on and hear from what Jesus is going to say to us about a very similar thing. He's talking with the disciples about the methods of the kingdom. And he has just heard Peter, we talked about this last week in the lectionary, was Peter's declaration that Jesus is truly the Messiah. He is the King of Israel. He is the one who is going to be the true Israelite, the one who will lead them out of their oppression from the Romans, from the impact of the empire upon the Jewish people themselves, and not only release them, give them the jubilee that they need externally, but give them the jubilee they need internally. That there is going to be a new method to this kingdom. That when Jesus reigns as the true King of Israel, there will be a new way of being Israel for all of the people who follow this Messiah. That's what Jesus is declaring, and he's saying we need to take the ways that you think about the world and toss them out. We need them outside of you. So then Jesus begins to explain what's going to happen next. He said, what's going to happen is if we're going to live out this kingdom, we're going to live it out in a kingdom of love. We're not going to use the methods of violence. We're not going to use the methods of crushing one another. We're going to use the methods of love. And love is listening. Love is release. And love has a cost. And the cost to Jesus, if he's going to fully live out this method, is he knows he is going to die. He knows that all the powers that are going to hear that he is the up-and-coming power and want to crush him. That's the method of empire. We've talked about that already today. And they are going to crush him. And at that decisive moment when they begin to crush him, instead of fighting back the empire way, he is going to trust in Yahweh, the kingdom way. He's going to trust in his God, that his God will rescue him. And the way that we see the rescue is, of course, resurrection, but nobody's really knowing what's going to happen here. So Peter hears this and says, you can't get crushed. That's not the way of it. That's not the way how we do life. Kings, messiahs, are supposed to go in and overturn the bad guy and slice up the bad guy and declare themselves to be the true king, and that's how it's supposed to work. And Jesus says, get behind me, Satan. That is not the method of God. That's the method of the accuser, of Satan, of empire. You missed the point, Peter. You declared me to be the king, but you missed what type of king I'm going to be. I'm going to be a king of peace, shalom, not through violent, oppressive means, but through a loving kingdom means. And then he starts declaring what that's going to look like for all of the disciples. If anyone wants to come after me, they must deny themselves. They must take the empire outside of themselves. Take up their cross, the cross being the propaganda symbol of empire. That place that is the ultimate challenge. and go to that and say, I'm going to challenge the empire. I'm going to end up on a cross. I'm going to be the one who challenges this method and say, there's got to be a better way. Take up their cross and follow me. And then Jesus says, whoever wants to save their life will lose it. If you want true life, don't go the ways of crushing people for peace, but loving people and bringing justice. That's true life, and it's going to cost you. It's going to cost you all the benefits you've had of the empire. It's going to cost you all the benefits that you think are out there. And it's going to might even cost some of us our lives. But don't worry, we have resurrection on our side. What good will it be for humanity to gain the whole world? That's the promise of the empire. Yet forfeit their soul, their suke in Greek, which means their very being, their essence of who they are. You're forfeiting who you are, who you're truly made to be. Jesus is offering us this opportunity to give up the things of this world. Paul says it this way, do not be conformed any longer to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you'll be able to know what and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. You'll be in the center of God's will when we abandon the things that are making us conform to the image. It's no longer good to just be outside of Egypt. We need Egypt outside of us. We need the kingdom to invade us. That the methods of Jesus will overtake us. The methods of love will overtake us. So where do we go from here? What are a couple of things we can start with this week? What does it look like? I think there's an importance to looking for, listening for, and being attuned to injustices around us. That I think this is one of the big callings of the church, is to say, what are the injustices all around us? I'm obviously overwhelmed with poverty and homelessness and other things here in London, but there are injustices all over the place. And there's all sorts of injustices to people being ostracized and tossed to the edges of society. Who are those people? What are the places on the planet that are being tossed away and being used as a garbage dump? Who are the people that are being tossed away? How do we treat God like that he's being tossed away and tossed to the edges of society and of our world? Who are those things? What are those people? And what are the injustices happening there? And then we start going there. Right? We go to those places of injustice, and when we get there, here's the lesson of today. When we get there, we tend to use our methods, the things that we think work. But when we go there this time, according to what I'm sensing from this scripture from Moses' lessons, when we go there, listen to those people. Listen and pay attention and hear from them. What are the best responses? These are God's prophets. He has called these people to lift their voice up to us so that we can hear truly what we need to do and how we need to do it. So start walking, identifying the injustices, and realize it's a journey. I'm in year 14 of working here in London, Ontario. And I feel like every year I've learned more than the previous year. I feel like I'm starting to get it, and then I realize how far I need to go. One of the gentlemen in our community, we were doing a Bible study yesterday, and I was declaring how far we still need to go, and he was really excited. He's like, but Gil, you've come so far. And I said, yeah, that's true, and I'm excited about that, and I appreciate that. That's a really nice compliment. But I also tend to look and see, how far do we need to go? Because we're still using in many ways the methods of charity, that we give from what we have to people who don't have. And that's nice, and it maintains things for the time being, and it keeps people alive, but it doesn't challenge the system. And so we need to find ways to bring us all together. Isaiah uses the image of the mountains come down and the valleys come up, that there's going to be enough for everybody. Jesus says, I've come to bring life and life abundantly, that there's going to be more than enough for everybody. So that's what I have for you this morning. That's what God has been laying on my heart. Let me pray, and then we'll close this time together. Lord, thanks so much for this time. Thank you for the lesson you have shared with us through the life of Moses, that he was brought up in the empire, that he was brought up benefiting in all sorts of ways from the imperial method. But then he sees injustice. His heart breaks for injustice, and he responds. But he responds with the methods of the empire. Help us to see ourselves in this story. Help me to see myself in this story. And then help us to then listen to the prophets. As Moses did the next day, hearing from his Hebrew friends, what are you going to do? Kill us? You're still using the methods of the empire. Help us to now use the methods of Jesus, the methods of love, of justice for all, of abundance for all. Thank you for this amazing calling on your church, your mission, your people. Amen. And amen.